Joshua, the divine warrior, chosen by God to conquer the impossible. The shadow of a giant. Joshua's unknown beginning. In a world gripped by slavery and surrounded by enemies, the name Joshua might have sounded like any other. Just another Hebrew among thousands suffering in the darkness of Egypt. But destiny doesn't whisper to just anyone. It screams in the silence of obscurity, calling forth those brave enough to listen. And Joshua was listening. Born into the house of Nun, from the tribe of Ephraim, Joshua's early years were not marked by royalty or prophecy. He was just a slave's son. But there was something unexplainable, an intensity in his eyes, a fire in his spirit that no whip could extinguish. He saw Moses rise. He saw the Nile turn to blood, the skies darken with plagues, and the Red Sea split like paper in the hands of a furious God. And yet, Joshua remained in the background, a silent observer, a warrior in training, not just for battle, but for something greater, something that even he couldn't imagine yet. When Moses led the people out of Egypt, it was Joshua who followed him like a shadow. He didn't seek power. He wasn't craving leadership. But God wasn't looking for a politician. He was preparing a weapon, one that would shake the foundations of kingdoms. But before conquering cities, Joshua had to conquer fear. His first test? Amalek, a brutal and unrelenting enemy. When Moses raised his arms during battle, it was Joshua who was down in the valley, sword soaked in sweat and blood, fighting for the survival of a nation. Victory came not just through divine intervention, but through Joshua's raw courage. But his real journey, his divine awakening, began with 12 men and a spy mission into Canaan. Most returned trembling. 10 saw giants. Only 2 saw possibilities, Caleb and Joshua. But hope has a price. The people rejected their courage. God condemned an entire generation to die in the wilderness. And so, Joshua waited. For 40 years, he wandered with the faithless, waiting for the promise to be fulfilled, waiting for his time. What does it mean to be chosen? It means walking with giants, knowing you may never be one. It means bearing silence while the world crumbles. It means being ready when God finally says, "Now." Moses' death and the transfer of divine authority. The greatest prophet of Israel was gone. Moses, the man who spoke with God face to face, who brought plagues upon Egypt, who parted seas and summoned food from heaven, was dead. A mourning like no other gripped the Israelites. Who could possibly fill the sandals of such a man? The answer came not in the form of another prophet, but of a warrior. God didn't choose a priest. He chose a soldier, Joshua. But leadership is not a title. It is a burden. Imagine standing before millions, knowing they doubted you, knowing they longed for Moses. Joshua had no burning bush, no tablets of stone. All he had was a voice, the same voice that spoke to Moses, now speaking to him. "Be strong and courageous," God said, again and again. Because courage wasn't optional. Fear would devour him if he let it. But what does courage look like when you're staring at the raging waters of the Jordan River with a nation behind you and no Moses to split the waves? You step in. Literally. The priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant placed their feet in the river, and it stopped. Just like the Red Sea, a new era had begun. The God of Moses was now the God of Joshua. But Canaan wasn't empty. It was filled with fortified cities, monstrous armies, and ancient evil. The land God promised was also the land everyone else wanted to keep. And the first obstacle? Jericho. A city of impenetrable walls and unmatched cruelty. Joshua's strategy was madness in human eyes. March in silence for 6 days, then shout. No battering rams. No siege weapons. Just faith. And on the 7th day, the walls didn't crumble, they imploded. As if heaven itself punched the ground. What happens when faith leads you into war? When obedience costs you everything? Joshua wasn't just fighting for land. He was fighting to prove that God's promises are not poetry, they are power. And with every victory, he wasn't just conquering territory. He was transforming. No longer the assistant. No longer the shadow of Moses. He had become the storm. The darkness of AI and the cost of sin. Victory often blinds us. After Jericho's miraculous fall, the people were unstoppable. Or so they thought. Their next target was the small city of Ai. A minor threat. An easy win. Or so it seemed. But something went terribly wrong. The Israelites were routed. Soldiers died. Confidence shattered. And Joshua, for the first time, fell to the ground in confusion and grief. Why had God abandoned them? The answer was hidden deep within the camp. A single man, Achan, had disobeyed the command to leave the spoils of Jericho untouched. He had stolen silver, gold, and a cloak. Buried them beneath his tent. A secret sin. And that sin cost lives. This was not just about theft. It was about trust. About obedience. God demanded purity in his army. Achan's hidden rebellion brought a spiritual infection, one that had to be cut out completely. Joshua's judgment was swift and brutal. Achan and his entire family were stoned and burned. A tragic and horrifying moment, but a necessary purge. Once the sin was removed, Ai fell. But the lesson remained: no army, no matter how divine its leader, can survive when corrupted from within. Joshua had learned that leadership meant more than strategy and strength. It meant vigilance against the invisible enemies: pride, greed, disobedience. The rest of Canaan would not fall easily. Kings formed coalitions. 5 armies at a time came against Israel. Yet under Joshua, they were crushed, often by hailstones from heaven, or by the sun standing still in the sky. Yes, Joshua commanded the sun. Not by magic, but by divine intervention. At Gibeon, with time running out and victory not yet assured, Joshua prayed one of the boldest prayers in all of history. And God listened. Time froze. And so did the hearts of Israel's enemies. Joshua had not just become a warrior, he had become a legend. Joshua's longest war. Conquest without compromise. As Joshua marched deeper into Canaan, the land grew darker. Not just in enemy resistance, but in the spiritual weight pressing down on every step he took. The cities weren't merely filled with warriors. They were bastions of depravity, idolatry, and blood cults. This wasn't just a campaign of expansion. It was a divine cleansing. And Joshua knew, partial obedience was disobedience. He couldn't afford diplomacy with evil. He didn't just fight battles. He executed judgment. City after city fell. Lachish, Libnah, Makkedah, Hebron, Debir. Their kings slain, their armies crushed, their people destroyed. No mercy. Not because Joshua was cruel, but because evil, when tolerated, multiplies like a disease. And Joshua had seen what compromise had cost Israel before. He would not let it happen again. Yet for all his victories, Joshua remained humble. He never built monuments to himself. He didn't sit on a throne or carve his name into stone. His loyalty remained to the God who had chosen him. But conquest is not just about fighting. It's about finishing. When the northern kings united in a final desperate coalition, it was a war unlike any before. Chariots rumbled, horses thundered, and weapons clashed in the valley of waters. But Joshua didn't flinch. His faith had been forged in fire. And in the midst of chaos, God said to him again, "Do not be afraid of them, for tomorrow at this time I will give them all over to Israel." And so it was. By the end of that campaign, the land lay still. The terror of Joshua's God echoed from mountain to sea. Yet even then, Joshua wasn't done. He continued purging the land until there were no threats left to rise against God's people. And then came a different battle, the one against comfort, against complacency. Dividing the land among the tribes wasn't just administration. It was a test of character. Some tribes hesitated. Some wanted easier land. Others feared the remnants of giants still lurking in caves and forests. Joshua reminded them, "How long will you wait before you take possession of the land the Lord has given you?" Conquest isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's about taking responsibility for the victory already won. The final challenge. Legacy over luxury. Years passed. Joshua grew old. His body weakened, but his spirit remained a furnace. His hair grayed, but his eyes still burned with divine fire. He had led a nation from the edge of extinction to the peak of promise. But his greatest concern was not war, it was the future. Would the next generation remain faithful? He gathered the leaders, the elders, the warriors, the priests, and in one final, thunderous speech, he reminded them of everything: the miracles, the victories, the covenant. And then, he issued a challenge that echoed through eternity. Choose this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. This was not a man clinging to relevance. This was a warrior sealing his legacy. He warned them, if they turned to idols, they would fall. If they forgot their God, the land would spit them out. His message wasn't sugar-coated. It was raw, prophetic, and unforgettable. And then, quietly, like a soldier laying down his sword, Joshua died. But his story didn't. Because legacy isn't built on fame. It's built on faith. Joshua had no statues, no crown, no palace. But he had something far greater: obedience. He had answered the call when others ran. He had fought when others feared. He had trusted when others doubted. And now, his name stands not just in Scripture, but in the DNA of a people. He was more than a leader. He was the embodiment of divine courage. And the question he asked Israel is the same we must ask ourselves: whom will we serve? Joshua's journey wasn't about conquest, it was about transformation. He was not born a leader. He was forged into one through fire, obedience, and relentless faith. He wasn't perfect. He didn't have Moses' voice or Elijah's fire. But he had something unshakable: trust. Trust that God's timing is perfect. Trust that faith sometimes looks like madness before it becomes a miracle. Trust that one man, chosen by God, can shift the course of history. We live in a world still filled with walls, of fear, of hatred, of doubt. We fight battles no one sees. But Joshua's story teaches us this: if you are chosen, you are never alone. The walls will fall. The rivers will part. The sun will stand still when your mission aligns with heaven. So, to you watching this now, maybe you feel invisible. Maybe your past has been full of wilderness. Maybe you've stood in the shadow of someone else's greatness. But remember, so did Joshua. And maybe, just maybe, this is your moment. Not to lead a nation, but to lead your life with faith that shakes the heavens. Because God still chooses. And when He does, it's not the strong or the proud. It's the willing. So, whom will you serve? Thank you for watching this video. We kindly ask you to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Also, turn on the notification bell so you'll be notified about our future uploads. See you in the next video.